So today we're going to be discussing this partnership proposal between Olympus and FiatDAO. So FiatDAO are building a I don't want to butcher it. It's a unpegged coin, I don't know, asset that is maybe you should describe, but by yield, essentially the yielding positions of interest products. Is that kind of a good summary?
It's definitely close.
I
Yeah,
don't
so
have the words. I get the concept, yeah.
yeah, I would say that the simplest way of putting it is we're building a collateralized debt protocol, but not for a explicitly pegged asset. So for folks who are familiar with MakerDAO or Reflexer, it's kind of similar to what's going on here. Our twist is that we're essentially rolling out support for assets that do not have liquid secondary markets, i.e. most of fixed income in DeFi today. And that's kind of where we're really looking to provide some bread and butter functionality where today there is none.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a short description of the product. So the request for comment is on the forum. I might introduce everyone who's up on stage. So my name is Mark11, and I work as a partnerships contributor in the DAO. And this is Nutch, who's kind of the marketing facilitator for some of the areas of partnerships. And he works very closely doing due diligence for the incubator as well. And of course, the other person up here is Max, who's the founder of FiatDAO. So if you have a look in the chat, there's the link posted there to the request for comment for the partnership. And essentially, the FiatDAO is building some products on top of Olympus bonds, to be able to use them for this minted asset, as Max said, similar to RAI, except for the underlying collaterals are not the same. It's for a very particular type of collateral, and that collateral is these interest-bearing positions. So maybe I'm butchering that as well. But essentially, Olympus bonds will be will be one of the collateral types that is able to be the asset to be minted against, and Max and the team see that Olympus bonds playing a big part in the protocol when it launches, and the launch is coming up shortly, I believe. I'm sure Max will tell us more about that. So just a little bit on the partnership. We've been talking to Max, our engineering team, and our policy team about integrating a sort of a special mechanism into the bonding, into allowing the bonds that are purchased, and this will all be capped, and we're building minimum viable products, so it won't be like it's 100% from day one. They'll build it up slowly, but it's this facility where someone can come and buy a bond, and then if the price sort of deviates too much from the position, then they're able to sell the bond back and receive the collateral that they put into the treasury with essentially Olympus collecting differential on that, for which ends up being a profitable position for Olympus to take, kind of no matter what happens. So either Olympus gets the very useful service of having people bond into our treasury, or we collect a fee for the bonds being returned to the treasury and the collateral that was originally bonded in being returned to the person holding the bond position. And so that's one collab. That's the kind of main integration that Fiat and Olympus are looking to have integrated kind of at their launch or before their launch. And then there's this other treasury swap to align our protocol. So what essentially it is FiatDAO is giving 1% in total of their FTT governance token, and Olympus receives 0.5% now, and then 0.5% vested over 12 months. And the vesting is to kind of keep Olympus aligned and very interested in FiatDAO's success. And then Olympus provides the value of 0.5% of the FTT immediately vested to FiatDAO. And then there's a commitment from both protocols that they won't that they'll retain the swap tokens. So the TWAP so people are probably wondering, well, what is the price of this? How is that determined? And since the FiatDAO's been having like a couple of different liquidity mining programs and Olympus Pro program, in the end we decided that it would be best to have a 7-day historical time-weighted average price from the date of the announcement of the partnership. So that will be from last week on the 13th, and then it will be the 7 days prior to that, and they'll take the average price from the day, and then that sort of average of those averages will be what the swap is done at. So I think that's pretty much. I'm sure I got some of the language wrong for the describing the bond mechanism. But Max, maybe you can, tell us about the sort of proposal. Well, maybe you can tell us and give us a bit more of expansive discussion around FiatDAO, sort of what you're building, how close you are to launching. And then sort of how will OMIs be able to sort of interact with the protocol when it does go live?
Sure. So hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Max, and I'm one of the 4 co-founders behind FiatDAO. We announced kind of ourselves to the world in October, so give or take 3 months ago. And essentially what we're trying to do is solve a problem we all faced back when we were working at Barnbridge. And so for those of you who are familiar, Barnbridge is a suite of protocols, one of which is Smart Yield. And that protocol gets you access to fixed yields. The main issue we were solving for is that fixed yields to date have not been super attractive in DeFi and don't really cater to kind of the predominant user base in DeFi, right? Like 5% on stables guaranteed, right? It's not what most of us wake up for in the morning. And so what we kind of set out to solve both for Barnbridge Smart Yield, but a kind of fixed yield products across the board in DeFi is how can we reduce the opportunity cost of that position such that it actually becomes more attractive to users, especially DeFi natives. And so FiatDAO is essentially a protocol solving for this across all those fixed income asset protocols. And the idea is that by offering leverage that is calibrated to the yield those positions typically receive, like single digits, let's say, it now becomes possible for users to take fixed income positions and borrow an asset against them and go on with their merry way. Put simply, we're trying to make it such that a fixed income position is not the end of the road, like it has been for certain protocols to date. And so, like I said, we kind of announced the concept back in October, and we're currently targeting, I would say, like a Valentine's Day launch, sometime mid-Feb, barring any kind of massive audit responses. We're still underway with one and have a few peer reviews coming up. But the way to think about what we're doing at Fiat is you will be able to bring supported collateral types to the platform and mint this asset, Fiat, short for fixed income asset token, against it. The version that's launching in February will be relatively vanilla, both in terms of like the LTVs offered, and I think we'll do a debt cap even. But the end goal is essentially to create a protocol where you're able to bring assets that might not have super liquid secondary markets. Like I would say the V2 ohm bonds at the moment, or in the case of Barnbridge, those bonds are represented by NFTs as well. So it's just not going to be as liquid as a AMM would be, and that makes it tough to liquidate positions. And so what we're creating with FiatDAO is essentially a protocol that can take in those types of assets, and if users do get liquidated, actually have mechanisms in place that allow the protocol to make sure there's no accumulation of bad debt. And our white paper goes into greater detail about that, but I think the forum proposal actually gives a good example of what I mean by that. And so kind of referencing back to the forum post, we're excited to collaborate with OlympusDAO, hopefully under the umbrella of a formalized token swap, primarily to build out a concept called options or ohm options. And I can kind of walk through, how that relates to the wider fiat vision. So essentially, right, we view Olympus bonds as being one of the primary, fixed income assets in the DeFi landscape going forward. And to be able to accept them as collateral, we essentially need to be able to say, if a user gets liquidated because the value of their bond drops, precipitously over the course of it being deposited in fiat, we can't assume that there will be, a friendly whale or a friendly arbitrager in the market that's willing to, liquidate that position like you would on Aave or Compound. So what we have to do is assume that the fiat protocol itself can confiscate the asset, and then B, once that ohm bond matures into just GOM proper, actually be able to clear the debt of the position that got liquidated, at that later date then. And so, the main way of ensuring that is having put options, right? Like if we can, ensure that ohm that matures, after 5 days is worth X, then we can mint fiat against it, knowing that worst case scenario, the protocol can take that ohm and kind of exchange it for fiat that might be floating on the secondary market and then clear out the debt. And a good way of doing this at scale with OlympusDAO is actually working with the treasury, kind of like the existing policy mechanisms that are in place. And that's what this concept of options is trying to achieve. And so as Mark alluded to, right, this is still kind of a work in progress, but essentially it's pretty straightforward in that what it's saying is you would be able to take a GOM bond that has just recently matured, or potentially even over the lifetime of the bond itself, and actually return it to the Olympus Treasury in exchange for some majority of the principal that had been provided. So I don't know, let's say 95% of what was provided initially, and in exchange for giving back the ohm. And so net, the individual who first started this has 95% of their principal back. The Treasury has extinguished all the ohm that got minted through that bond, and the Treasury is left with a 5% delta in that case. And so, if it was $100 to start with, the Treasury just made $5 of profit, and presumably, less selling pressure on ohm now exists in the secondary market. And so taking that to fiat and kind of wrapping a bow on this, what essentially this would allow for is for you to bring a GOM bond to fiat, mint at a very high LTV, because we know, somehow we have proof of this option at work. And should you go really degen with it and get liquidated, we know that we can sell the GOM that eventually matures via that bond back to the OlympusDAO treasury and actually be able to clear the bad fiat debt outstanding. And so this is essentially an example of how FiatDAO can actually scale can scale to assets that are denominated in non-stable assets. So while our mid-February launch will just be stablecoin denominated bonds on, say, like Element Finance, you can imagine like any type of volatile bond, whether that is an Olympus bond, a Friendly Forks bond, or an Olympus Pro bond, essentially emulating this OM options design, and now kind of accessing leverage through fiat, which is super exciting in my opinion, because that just does not exist in any meaningful way today, right? And it's kind of a new concept in general in DeFi. And I think the one thing I'll also bring up before handing it back to Mark is that when you think about this kind of concept of OM being a reserve asset, in the real world, that kind of role is very much determined by who denominates debt, right? And so in the real world, I think it's like 80% is USD denominated at the end of the day. And so building out these types of systems makes it far, far, far easier, at least in my opinion, for OM denominated debt to be a thing, right? And that's essentially kind of the end goal of fiat, is reducing the opportunity cost associated with DeFi debt, and bringing forward a really productive economy, and kind of moving beyond where crypto is today, right, which is mostly speculation, very, very much so. So that's why we're super excited about the prospect of this partnership, and I'm happy to kind of go down any rabbit holes you'd like, Mark.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think fiat's pretty complicated. So before we take some questions, I might dig down a little deeper. So I remember you originally explaining the idea for fiat is, and this was really useful for me to understand, that if so there's in the US, these big players, they can buy a US Treasury bond and say they got 1 or 2% yield on that. They could have their 1 or 2% yield, but that wasn't enough for them. So they could go to a lender and say, here, I've got this asset, which is this US Treasury bond. It's the most clean collateral there is in the world. Can I borrow against it? And then they say, for sure, we'll give you 97% of the value of that back. And then you can, have that money. And then the person takes that, and then they go and buy another US Treasury bond with it, and then they keep on doing the same thing over and over, in order to sort of get a higher yield than they would be able to at the beginning. And it sort of allows you to scale what you would usually be smaller interest rates into something larger that is satisfactory as a sort of return on the position, just because the collaterals that FiatDAO will be accepting are these kind of pristine sort of interest-bearing positions that FiatDAO can have quite some certainty about what the return is going to be. And then sort of you were trying to think about how you could solve that mechanism for currencies, for assets that weren't denominated in US dollars. And so you have this kind of fiat token which can be minted against those positions, and it kind of has a floating price. Did I get that? Is that right, Max?
You did a very good job. And what I can do is I can walk through an example of what Mark's getting at, and this concept of
re-leveraging.
I think
that would be good. Mm-hmm.
For
so
sure.
Say maybe with like a US dollar yielding position, and then with a sort of an Olympus bond would be good. like what are the steps from from start to finish?
Sure. So I'll go ahead and start off with an example from Element Finance. So Element allows you to deposit a stablecoin into a variety of yield-bearing strategies. I think Urine is the primary one. And when you do so, you get a principal token and a yield token. And what we focus on at Fiat is the principal token side of that equation. And so what that principal token entitles you to is essentially just the underlying that was deposited, but at some point in the future. So if you put in 100 USDC, this principal token would allow you to unlock that 100 USDC, but in maybe 3 months' time or 6 months' time. And because of that time delay, it trades at a discount. And so let's say it trades at 97 cents on the dollar. You can now say that that has a fixed yield of 3%. Because if you buy it at 97 cents per USDC, you know that you're going to get $1 worth of USDC at the end. And it's kind of this predictability that we rely on at Fiat. And so if you have that position, so you took your 100 USDC and you got an equivalent amount of principal tokens, you would be able to kind of take that to Fiat, or maybe you bought these on secondary, right? So you buy 97 principal tokens, $97 worth of principal tokens on the secondary market, knowing it'll mature into $100, and you bring that to Fiat. And what we would do at Fiat is say, okay, you're bringing a USDC bond. That's great. We're totally fine kind of with the risk there. Maybe there's a very high level maximum LTV we'd accept. But because it matures in 6 months or 3 months, we would essentially calculate a dynamic LTV. So, if you deposit and there's 6 months left to go, the LTV you get on day 1 versus day 90 will be lower. And so it kind of converges on a maximum LTV that would be accessible the day before maturity. And so with that position deposit, you'd be able to mint fiat against it. And this is an important nuance. The system assumes a dollar price, or $1 price for fiat, but that's mainly for calibration. And so what that means is if fiat is actually trading at less than $1 in the secondary market, which in a vacuum it should to some extent, then that further impacts the LTV you're offered. And so it's really kind of this concept of a dynamic LTV that reflects both the asset and the fiat asset itself. But let's assume there's a lot of demand for fiat and no whales have been aggressively dumping or whatever, and it is $1, right? You would be in a position then to take the fiat you just minted against your position and actually go and convert it back into USDC. Now, you might do that by straight up selling secondary liquidity or borrowing, maybe in a fuse pool, or minting, maybe it's not USDC, maybe it's something like FE or Frax or Ohm, right? At the end of the day, that's obviously a long-term conversation, but if you're able to get from fiat to another asset, you can then take that asset and get another bond. And by doing this, you're essentially looping, you're re-leveraging. And that's how, if you're able to do that with minimal friction between cycles, you're actually able to create a fixed income position that is levered relative to what you originally had. And that's how, in a nutshell, right, fiat makes these assets more attractive, right? Because if you're able to re-leverage 10 or 20 times over without the value of your fiat changing drastically, or kind of the originator market, the rate it's offering you changes drastically, you can actually, get quite a boost on that fixed yield. And that is truly fixed yield at the end of the day, right? It's not, a shot in the dark anymore. It's guaranteed to mature into something and are familiar with. And we think that's what makes debt in DeFi far more interesting for the reasons Mark kind of alluded to. Obviously in the real world, it's a bit different. If you're selling these bonds into dollars, right? You don't really have to worry about the value of the dollar fluctuating. We at Fiat don't have a central bank backing us, and so this reflexive system is kind of our answer to this problem. And so that's why we say it's a stable value asset. Kind of the mechanisms at work are focused on making sure that the debt you take on doesn't change that much in value, as opposed to a strict peg. Because at the end of the day, we are backed by relatively illiquid assets, or assets that just aren't as liquid as their actual occupiers. So that's why we kind of view there being an opportunity for a new protocol here, because existing solutions that try to maintain a peg would break if a lot of their collateral backing wound up turning into these types of illiquid assets.
Very cool. So say I had a bond, and the V2 bonds with Olympus are these NFTs. So I'm able to take that. I will be able to take that bond and say, here, FiatDAO, here's my bond. Can I mint some fiat against it? And Fiat would look at sort of what the cost of what the price of ohm is and what the underlying entitlement is for the bond that I have, and then sort of work out an amount that I could borrow against it at a loan to value ratio of whatever it is, and it can be higher if you have this certainty that you can sell it back for 95% of the cost of it, so you can sort of outcompete any other platform that's trying to offer the same service, because you partnered with Olympus and we have interest in your upside, and you have interest in our upside. And then I say I borrow, like it's worth $100, and I say, oh, I want to be safe, I'll borrow like 50% of that, and then I can take that 50%, and what I can then do with the 50% of the value of the ohm, which I'm holding now in fiat because I minted fiat against it, I can go and sell that fiat and then go and buy anything I like. But I might want to go and buy another bond because I'm like want higher exposure to the price of Olympus. To those discounts that are being offered by Olympus. So and then I've, instead of having 100% of a bond, I've got 150% of the bond because you're holding that NFT, which represents my bonding position. So since it is an NFT, can FiatDAO just hold that indefinitely as the collateral against the position? Is that how it would work? Or is this more you're sort of seeing the future of the DAOs, so Olympus's bonds, and it's kind of going to be kind of more relevant like when we have these longer term bonds, which might even be like 6 months or whatever?
Yeah, so to answer the first question, we take in either ERC20 or ERC721 assets and actually convert them to ERC1155 on the inside. And so we can also accept native ERC1155s as well. And so you'd be able to actually like deposit your NFT and get this line of credit, right? Essentially is what the minting capacity is. And so that's kind of how we're, catering to the various implementations of fixed income assets kind of across the board. And so for folks that aren't super familiar with what that looks like, essentially most protocols have, made a decision one way or another on how they represent their fixed income. In the case of Olympus, because you do get to retain, when the maturity is, essentially, right? Like if you go and mint, you get your own 5-day term, right? It's not shared with anyone else. And so that level of customization is why an NFT works well. That was the case with Barnbridge Smart Yield as well. Whereas other protocols, Element, for example, they have specific maturity dates, and that allows them to then kind of do an ERC20 for a select batch of fixed income assets for that very specific period. And so that was kind of an engineering, not dilemma, it's just something that had to be solved, right, on our end. And the 1155 standard was how we went about that, because that allows you to kind of fractionalize the NFTs you take in for any liquidation purposes, for example. And so with that in place, we'd be able to support the kind of OlympusDAO NFT bonds. And as Mark pointed out, this gets really interesting, right, when you think about longer dated ones, because the need if you're doing a 5-day bond, you just have totally different kind of considerations than a 6-month commitment, right? Especially for a commitment that might not have the liquidity of an AMM available, right? And so that's what we're really excited about, kind of like unlocking market demand for those longer dated bonds by virtue of this type of system.
Yeah, and assumedly, if you're taking a 6-month bond, you're going to be wanting a different discount than if somebody's sitting beside you and they're taking on a 5-day bond, right? You would expect the longer term bonds to have a deeper discount from the current price because people are taking on a sort of lot more volatility risk doing it for that longer term. So I think and that will sort of and you might want to have more exposure to it even then still. So I think the real big benefit for Olympus in kind of having this relationship, Omis, and Max, you can tell me if you agree, is that it will have this negative price pressure on the discounts, because it'll make you be able to be more competitive as a person who's taking a bonding position.
Exactly. And I had a quick Twitter convo with Wortel last night that kind of touched on this, right? But essentially, longer dated GEOM bonds can kind of represent a way of rewarding users who are committed to essentially being staked longer, right? Because like the GEOM inside of that bond is staked at the end of the day. And so unlocking, some flexibility, some optionality against those positions will definitely be key, I think, in aligning power use with the protocol long term. And that's where this concept of OMA options really stands out too, right? Because if we're able at the protocol level here at FiatDAO to know that that GEOM bond that matures in 6 months, it has a guaranteed floor of whatever it may be, then you can offer very high LTVs against that position, like very, very high, right? And use the strike price as the oracle. And with that in place, it now is just a totally different kind of calculus for folks who are wondering whether or not they should bond for that long. And my view personally is, whether it's a reserve-backed asset like Olympus, or the kind of DeFi native stablecoins that are competing against each other, the more of your circulating supply you have locked up for as long of a period as the market is interested. Ultimately, it just is far more conducive to any Lindy effect the asset might achieve, right? Like if 10% of OM is locked for a year, in my opinion, that increases the likelihood of OM success out, right? And so that's where I think the relevance is really going to show in DeFi, right? It's this kind of concept of whoever is around the longest has the highest likelihood of success, and that's what these types of assets offer at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of DeFi is surviving long enough that people give you another look in if you haven't attracted them to date. Maybe we can pull up. Nach, did you have anything you think we're thinking the audience might want some more clarification on before we kick it off? Questions?
I think just one of the questions that I was seeing often is why GM as a partner. There was some question about FiatDAO using potentially like different pairs or different things like that. Maybe just want to address that briefly. I think folks want to know why a great partnership with Ohm.
Sure. So I think the interest in Ohm main pair to date has really lied in the fact that it is as liquid as it is relative to the key assets we think about, right? ETH, they're stable. But the flip side of this is now with the introduction of Geom, right, and the governance capabilities that'll confer going forward. It gets back to what I was saying earlier about the holy grail for fiat is it acting as collateral itself, and users actually being able to mint assets against it when they're doing those types of re-leveraging cycles. And so we're very keen at the DAO level to accumulate Geom in particular, because ultimately, if fiat is a success, that'll play a role in our ability to kind of lobby for Ohm fiat bonds from the OlympusDAO treasury. And you can imagine a scenario in that case, right, where people are able to take their minted fiat and actually bring it straight back to Olympus, mint a bond against it, and kind of go around the merry-go-round a few months longer than if they had to, kind of sell or borrow on the open market, so to speak. And so for those two reasons, we found a Geom, Ohm or Geom pairing to be most conducive for us as an early project.
Very cool.
Thanks. And then one more. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mark. Finish your thought there.
I was just gonna say, there's always another unlock that Max has already planned in the future that you don't expect. Yeah, go ahead, Nudge.
Yeah, Max, a one click for that would be great. Let's just click once. Another thing, maybe, and I don't want to get too far afield here, but some folks are talking about fees, and obviously one of the great things about Geom is that you can go across different networks. I know one of those networks is Arbitrum. You want to maybe tell us a little bit about your plans?
Sure. So given the nature of FiatDAO, right, we're essentially building on those who have come before us, so to speak. And so for us to go cross chain, is kind of it's a two-sided question, right? Because fiat, the asset, will definitely be able to go kind of cross chain, I think, sooner than kind of collateral options for fiat might, just because there aren't all too many fixed income assets across non-Ethereum chains. Pendle is now on Avalanche, for example. But I mean, our view is that we will expand to EVM compatible networks and rollups as fast as humanly possible, right? And to your point on Arbitrum, right? I think an interesting case there will be kind of along the lines of this concept of hedging positions that the protocol owns. Working with DopeX to have put options for assets that may be denominating bonds on Arbitrum, I think will be really, really helpful. The kind of like liquidity that'll be available in those derivatives markets, I think, is totally new. We've never seen that in DeFi before, right? Kind of like these option writing vaults, right? And so that's kind of what we're definitely building towards, is kind of recognizing that DeFi protocols today aren't really operating in a vacuum as they used to. And when you have protocols like DopeX on Arbitrum or Ribbon on mainnet, that's something you can kind of build, keep them in mind, right? And so that's, I think, what definitely excites me about Arbitrum in particular, to your point, Notch.
Wonderful answer. And then we had some questions from the audience. One person I think might have gotten rugged, but PSNT Nick, I don't know, Mark, if you're ready to take questions just yet, but if you are, we have one
let's
on the stage.
I think we're ready.
Sure. Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
We hear you fine.
Perfect. So I'm particularly interested in kind of digging down a little into the options, which is a great name, by the way. I love that. But it sounds to me in my reading of it that it could really help solve a potential problem that I think hasn't really had a good solution yet, and that is, kind of downside protection against the ohm price. I'm not 100% sure if it would work, but I'm curious, could this tool be used to control, because it looks like we're allowed to get some of the value back. Could we use this to kind of like, protect ourselves from downwards price movement in ohm, or would that not work in that way?
It's certainly not designed to do so. Max, feel free to take the question. I think it might be, a little off topic. But.
Yeah, I mean, it's admittedly a bit nuanced and would fall onto the policy and their discretion, right? I think the best way to think about it is it reduces kind of the opportunity cost of any bond you might take. To your point, right? Like if you're able to get most of your principal back, it acts as a form of downside protection, but like it would not be at the scale of Olympus proper, right? Like it would be some subsection of bonds have this type. Would be eligible, depending on how the specification gets built and how the policy team manages the program, and that would not fall on FiatDAO, right? On our end, this would just serve as the primary hedging strategy for this specific collateral type. And so, to kind of elaborate on that just a tad, if you think about other solutions on the market, whether they're lending markets or collateralized debt protocols, right? You see governance approve collateral types, and in our case, it would be approved collateral types as well as approved hedging strategies for the underlying asset, kind of similar to like maybe how Yearn financed strategies on their end. So for us, it would mean there are any variety of ohm bonds we could come to accept, and we have strategies X, Y, and Z for hedging ohm risk, and ohmchins would be one of them. But DopeX puts against GOhm could be a second strategy, right? And now you can have like a market for which strategy makes the most sense. So, Mark, I don't know if you have anything to add there, but that's kind of how I do it.
I think Max covered it off pretty well. So the options won't be a sort of generalized mechanism for everyone to be able to come along and redeem their bonds. It'll only be, as Max described, for a certain class of bonds, and like when the specification gets built out, it won't be. It almost certainly will be only for whitelisted sort of parties to be able to come and execute that swap back, right? So it won't be, the general public being able to do this, because this is sort of, well, it might be in the fullness of time, but it's not intended to be, because that might undermine objectives that the policy team has, and this won't obviously apply to all bonds. It'll probably start quite small and then slowly sort of expand depending on how useful the Treasury team finds it. But the real benefit for Olympus is that it should compress the bond discounts to a very small amount, right? And it gets back to this sort of US Treasury yield, right? That I use the example at the beginning, where if you have a US Treasury and you're getting a small yield, well, if it's pristine collateral and the person who's lending you money to borrow against it to go and buy more US Treasuries can have certainty about how, like, the price of it. And for US Treasuries, it's easy because they're denominated in US dollars. Then you can lever up on that several times and get a yield from it that's acceptable, right? So what that means is that you can keep US Treasury prices, yields very, it's like actually quite a nice return for them because of how they're able to access the underlying collateral. Does that answer the question kind of, Nick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you have
definitely.
anything else you wanted to ask?
No, I think that answers my primary question. It was kind of just the first thing that came to mind. But yeah, I appreciate it. So it looks like it's not like for everybody to use. Kind of, it's going to have a little bit more of a restricted use case. So it's not just generalized put options for like everything. It's more restricted.
Well, so accessing the options facility will probably be whitelisted to FiatDAO, and then on and maybe I'm getting that wrong, Max, and that's not your understanding. But so it's still sort of getting specced out exactly how it's going to be built, but it's in mind with this this kind of facility for this product, because the policy team has agreed that, well, this actually having some bonds being able to do this and access this kind of being able to be used as like collateral in these systems would be a useful thing for the protocol to be able to sort of pull that arrow from its quiver whenever it needed it, right? So that's everyone agrees that this is a useful thing for the protocol, but at what scale, that's to be seen. And I think it'll become more and more relevant as we have longer and longer bond periods. Is that kind of your view as well, Max?
It is indeed.
All right, I got it right. So if anyone else has a question, just stick up your hand. We'll be watching the AMA channel as well. Yeah, is there anything you've seen in the AMA channel, Notch, that you think needs to be answered?
I think people are kind of just digesting everything that's happened in the last 24 hours, and we have Max up here talking about a layer of complexity. So I think it's a lot to unpack, but I think if you read the forum post, and I think listening to Max, and if you have questions, I would raise your hand, and I think you'll feel very good and very comfortable about what we proposed and how it's a great partnership where both sides are getting something very, very useful and very good for the economy, which will be better suited here with FiatDAO doing even more with us. Maybe just kind of a quick question on my end as somebody who was a day one investor in FiatDAO, and I've been there ever since. Any special plans for maybe more NFTs for some of these wonderful products you have optioned out to, or is that maybe too much alpha? Too much there.
Well, I can give some background for those who aren't familiar. But essentially, we did a 5 NFT to actually kind of wall off our liquidity mining that's been going on for the past 9 weeks. And this is the final week. And so we had like five tiers, and we're essentially giving out NFTs to progressively, smaller subsets of our DAO stakers. And so, unfortunately for Notch, those NFTs kind of lose their immediate utility in the next week. But I think what's cool about, NFTs, and I think you're kind of seeing this over at DopeX too, right? Is, they exist permanently, and the people who hold them kind of forever retain that OG status. And so my hope would be that, future kind of governance discussions, focus on, giving further utility to them. I think, in the very short term, some gated chats and stuff like that would be. But to make sure this isn't a total downer of a response, I will point out that, while we have published a white paper for the Fiat protocol, we have not done so for the FTT governance token. And so, that's something that's still kind of being specced out as well. But I think what I can at least confidently say is that it will play a role in kind of the risk management protocol. So what I mean by that is, right, like if we are looking to properly hedge all of the collateral in the system, that gets harder if 80% of fiat is backed by bonds denominated in a single asset. And so it really, presents an opportunity for, governance to, play both a ad hoc role when it comes to like adding, approved collateral types, but then also kind of like a more continuous role in setting, thresholds, or as we like to say in DeFi, gauges potentially, right? On how much of a given asset can actually be backing fiat at a given point in time. And so when we think about kind of like the DAO to DAO value, DAO to DAO utility, that fiat governance can provide, I think that's kind of where we see these types of partnerships really flourishing, by kind of allowing protocols to have a say in their asset, and the bonds their asset may denominate having an outsized presence in the fiat collateral at the end of the day. And so hopefully we'll be able to share more on that in the coming month or so. Like I said earlier, the V1 we're launching in February will be kind of a very guarded launch and probably won't have that, will not have that type of utility, but we're really trying to kind of like, month after month have modular expansions to the protocol, especially with that FDT kind of utility getting progressively more and more baked in.
Very cool.
Excellent.
So yeah, I think that's probably at the moment that everyone's wondering, well, what's the FDT good for? So the FDT is the governance token, and if you don't know, FiatDAO is launching DAO first, which means they're having on-chain governance from sort of the day dot, right? As soon as the protocol launches, I think the plan is to have governance ready with that. Is that right, Max?
So we've actually been live with governance for over a month now. But there's not too much to vote on. So
I was looking for votes. That's why I thought it hadn't started yet.
Yeah, and so I can expand on that quickly.
That'd be good.
Sure. So when we say we're DAO first, what that means is there is no real world entity representing fiat. There's no fiat labs or like that. We, kind of launched this DAO architecture that we borrowed from the folks over at Barnbridge, and have allowed users to kind of stake in it. And the way you can think about it now that it's activated is that this DAO architecture has both a treasury and the ability to execute on-chain transactions kind of related to that treasury. So staking FDT allows you to participate in any regular old snapshot vote, but also does allow you to have a in the content of that treasury, kind of direct resources as such. It's kind of like I would say like a token denominated multisig, I guess is probably the best way to put it. And so we're able to execute kind of transactions from the treasury through governance. But as Mark pointed out, we haven't had votes to date just because we have been kind of building the V1 of the protocol in private. We don't want to get front run, but once that V1 is live, then everything kind of goes transparent and everything gets like really, really open source at the end of the day. And then the hope will be that FiatDAO governance plays an intrinsic role in both kind of approving of collateral types initially, and those would be kind of ad hoc votes you're familiar with other systems. But then with the rollout of kind of protocol grade utility, right, like this actual concept of staking behind specific asset types you favor and stuff like that. And so we'll presumably have like an FDT white paper in addition to the fiat white paper that we published last week that kind of walks through that, and there'll be a goal for this kind of the first half of the year to roll out that FDT functionality on top of the core fiat protocol itself.
Thanks, Max. And you've got this vote locking as well for the FTT. Is that currently it gives you more voting power the longer you lock, and does it also increase the amount of rewards you receive, or is that? not something.
So it currently does not, but the rewards being emitted by single-sided staking at the moment are not, like part of the final design, so to speak. It's kind of just a distribution mechanism because we couldn't do a public sale. So it's kind of a way of like building community and kind of getting early supporters on board and kind of aligned at the end of the day. When it comes to the actual implementation of FTT utility, should there be FTT staking rewards of some sort or another, locking would presumably kind of benefit you, and how any of that gets calculated.
Yeah, and that'll be up to governance, of course.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Omis, if you head over to FiatDAO, you can check out what's happening. They've actually, you're running an Olympus Pro program as we speak. Is that right, Max?
We are, and I think we've gone through about a third of what we allocated for it, and it's been over a month. So I think that should be a program that goes through the end of Q1 at least.
Very cool. And then the last thing, maybe people might not know, but so there was an initial period where if you staked certain tokens, then you got an amount of every week. An amount of FTT every week for being a staker, and that was an initial way to sort of bootstrap the decentralization of the community. And after Bondbridge, was the second highest for the 4-week campaign. And then there was like a couple of other ones which are like a bit lower, like Rari and Wi-Fi. Did I get that right? It was the second largest?
It was, yeah. And so users were able for 4 weeks to get access to kind of that Jubilee, where we gave away 0.5% of token supply to Ohm stakers in particular. And I think actually there's a good chance to say some of you have not withdrawn despite rewards ending a month and a half ago. So if this rings any bells, you might want to check that out. We still have it on our UI if you need to withdraw.
Very cool. Yeah, it's annoying taking things out of contracts on Etherscan, I can attest. So it's not doing anything if you've got it there. Feel free to take it out. I think we might leave it there. It's currently up for a request for comment for the FiatDAO Olympus partnership. So that's the token swap, and then this integration for Ohmchains. And just noting that the integration, we see it as like a mutual benefit to both our protocols. But yeah, it won't be sort of exposing the bonding program to this kind of untested exposure. It'll be slowly built up over time as a minimum viable product, and then if policy is happy, they can allocate sort of a growing share of bonds depending on how useful they find it. But I expect it'll be a mixture of different types of bonds as we move forward, and it's just another option for Olympus to be able to achieve one of its policy objectives. So you can go and read about it on the forum, and then it'll soon move to, so maybe like today or later today or tomorrow, to an OIP, which will allow Omis to have a temperature check to say what their mood is about it. And then after that's been live for a little while, we'll put it up for a snapshot vote, if they're assuming everything goes well, and then you'll be able to vote on whether or not you want to execute on the partnership in the snapshot voting with your geom. Max, did you want to say anything before we finish up, or?
No, I think you did a good recap there. I think I think we included details about Fiat in the forum post, but if you're not familiar, you can find us on Twitter at just FiatDAO as the account name, and there we have a link tree link in the profile, so you can get access to everything else, like the Discord and the governance forum.
Very cool. Nutch, thanks for helping organize this. Nutch is a very, very hard worker in the DAO. These things take a lot to put together. There's a lot of organizing that goes on. We got lucky that we were right on the back end of that big call by Zeus. But yeah, we didn't plan for that to happen. But very glad it did. And yeah, thanks Nutch for helping put this together. And thanks so much, Max, for coming and talking with the community today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
All right. See you guys. I'll end the stage now.